Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, so I'll give you an update on what's going on with the Internet Logistics Living Lab. And let me dive into it straight away, if I can find a mouse to do this. Yes, we are. So what I'll do is first explain what exactly is that so-called Internet Logistics. I then need to talk about one record, which is what actually underpins the Internet Logistics. I have two short demos I want to show you, and then some lessons learned. So first, what is it? The Internet Logistics actually is a growing number of companies that are exchanging data via a common standard, which is exactly what we're trying to do with Federated, which is to be able to connect platforms together so we can share the data that is needed. What you're seeing here is something like 90 companies around the world are participating. We had a comment earlier that IATA is a global organization. And the reason is, of course, that air transport is not limited to Europe. In fact, freight within Europe by air is very limited. It's too short. We use other means of transport for that. But just to zoom into Europe, what you can see is even within Europe, there's a lot of companies participating in this project and that are actually sharing data using the One Record standard. And what you get is essentially what you would expect to see from global transport, which is these sort of clouds of companies, these networks of companies that exchange data over the various continents. And in this project, and these are real companies, these are real implementations, what we see is certain specialities. For example, in the EU, a lot of the work we do is focused on the actual transport part, multimodal transport, including road transport as well. We have some maritime connections. Whereas if you look at India, most of the people that are there in this project are actually solution providers. And this answers the question that came up earlier, I think it was in relation to the Finnish project, when they stated, we don't have our own One Record server yet. Well, that's perfectly normal because not everybody needs their own server. It's just like your websites. You don't run your own website. Your website is on someone else's server. And that is the approach that we see here as well, where we share data sharing infrastructure. So what does it actually mean then? Then how do you do that? So let me explain One Record in a single slide. One Record actually is very simple to explain. And in a large extent, I think it explains Federated as well. It is just the World Wide Web with a semantic model of data. It's all it is. And anybody that works in this domain says, oh, you mean semantic web? Yes, that's exactly what I mean. This is the semantic web. What you see at the bottom there is a typical URL. A URL, in this case, it's to get company information. And what you'll see in a moment in the demo, it says, this is how we access data. Now, we call this APIs, but the reality is we use them every day when we browse the web. You put in a URL, you get something back, a page. Or what you get back here is data. It's just the same. If I drill down one step further, what you'll see is that the technology is exactly the same as the web. There's nothing new about it, which answers an earlier question about what technologies we use, what standards. URLs, HTTP, there's an S in the HTTP, which refers to security, and then data formats. In this case, we use a lot JSON LD. JSON is a common data standard, and LD is an extension referring to linked data, but it's JSON. And it can be translated into any other dialect of RDF, including triple turtle language. So this is it. This is One Record. Now, just to point out why we added the semantic model is if you look at the World Wide Web as it is today, as you use it, as we all use it, is that it's an interface between humans and machines. You go to a web page, you do what you want to do, and you take in the information as a person. One Record is exactly the same, except the human hand is replaced by another robot. It's machines querying machines. What you get is networks of machines browsing through that network to find information. And so if you're looking at freight transport, you need a lot of information. You need, where does the freight come from? Who manufactured it? How much is the customer paying for this? What are the tax implications? What's the status? Is there a problem along the road? Has this been loaded? Has it been unloaded? Have the horses been fed while they're being transported? Things like that. These are all the sort of information you need, and it's the machines that are doing this interaction, so that you as an end user get what you need. So I'm going to show two demos. One is, these are both actually taken from a hackathon we organized. There's 100 companies I showed you earlier. They all have live implementations, but they're all busy getting ready for Black Friday, for Christmas. This is the busiest time of year for air freight operators. So I'm going to use these demos that were actually made as part of our hackathon. We did them every year. There's about 40 demos that we have in total. So I'm going to show two. And the first one here, I'm going to attempt to see if that works. It should work because we tested it. Oh, it's working.
Well, never say.
It's good. It's good. It's going.
Wait. It's not on the screen.
Isn't it?
Show it.
Too easy.
What? Seems to be.
It's on the screen.
We start with the video.
Yes, you can click the button if you want. No, you can go ahead.
Radio, right?
Yes, I'm ready.
Welcome to the demo video
except I didn't
of the
want the
French
sound.
team.
If you can just cut the sound.
Our team.
Yeah, I mean, Thomas Moreau, who you see on the screen here, is the guy presenting. He does a great job, but he takes more time than I have. So I'm going to explain it faster than him. And in fact, at home, I put it on double speed, but that's okay. So these people here, they had the one-track app. Fortunately, they put in the word track. Otherwise, it's one app, and then we have confusion. So the one-track app here is essentially doing the project that the Swedish colleagues were talking about earlier, which is when you combine maritime transport with another mode of transport with the DCSA. So DCSA was part of this project as well. They put their data available to us, and they created this app then to track. You'll see that in a second. They did some IoT as well, very similar, and then added some nice features for us. So I'm just going to sort of skip ahead to what to build. A simple architecture. I need to tell you that they did all of this in 24 hours. That's the whole trick with the hackathon. You start on Friday evening and you're done by Sunday morning. They use the OneRecord API with the OneRecord server, which they built during the weekend. And then they connected to a DCSA server, and they managed to get all of the data they needed for this combined transport. And so if you look at the left here, you can see what the actual supply chain was that they simulated, because it's a simulation using data from these simulation servers. And so it's a transport from Shanghai to Rotterdam, and then via another transport, road transport to Mouscron in Belgium. And then at some point, there's an e-commerce action as well, where somebody buys whatever it was, and it goes then from Brussels to Barcelona, where it gets delivered. What you're seeing on the right here is a recording of the app. So this is a real app that they built. They have the code available if we want it. And what you see is that they scan the box, they scan a 2D barcode, QR code, and it gives them access to all of the information that is related to this particular shipment. And you can see them scrolling here through the process of the loading and the unloading at the various points in the transport, which are on the left. Right now, they were looking at what's inside that box. I believe it's a computer. And so you can see as they're scrolling through this, they're picking up all of these events. Now, I saw some of the questions earlier on. This is really just the icing on the cake. That's not what Federated is about. Federated is getting to the data, and then you do something nice with it. What you see here is what you can do with it. In fact, here, what you see here is an IoT on temperature control of the goods as well. So it's also tracking that. A fully fledged app is just an example of what you do when you get the data. And that's often the issue, but that's, of course, we have solved with the other thing. I'm going to stay on this side, so we don't have to keep switching. So I'm just going to go back to, in fact, I'll search it, because rather than, so this is DevPost. Actually, it's the system we use for our hackathons. I think it's called OneRecord, which would make a lot of sense if I could type it. Wrong keyboard. OneRecord. My keyboard. Right, will it find it? DevPost, does it find it? No, it doesn't find it. You know what? I'm going to go back to the. So the next demo was from, this was a French team, by the way, with Air France and some other people. And the next project is from a German team that involved Lufthansa.
This one?
This is the one, yes, and we can click on that. Lufthansa and our colleagues from the Research Institute there. Fraunhofer is the one I'm thinking about. No, this one we're not going to watch. So,
How come?
no,
we're
I'm not going to watch this one.
Oh, sorry.
I'm going to go down the page.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, I want to stay there.
On this.
Yeah, I want to
Okay.
stay there. But it's not the video I want to show.
Ah, okay.
So if I go to the bottom of the page, they have a nice video too. You can look at it if you want. It has a German accent rather than a French accent. So, but they put a nice system together. And the reason I showed this particular demo, there's a disclaimer, so I will just consent to that, is that it shows in great detail how data is actually shared. And so we have this concept of the URL or the URI. You see a couple of them on the left here. I think I'll hide that. Don't think I need that. You see a couple of URLs here, and that's the basis of all the information we want. So what happens when you click on the URL? Now, this is a URL for a piece of cargo. And so we want to know what actually this is referring to. If I click on it, it actually displays in a nice way the raw data that comes back in JSON LD. Okay, so they've just made a browser. The reality is that it's just one of those data dumps that we've seen a few of today. But here they've put some structure in it. And what you see is that you have the piece and there's an item inside that piece, an item, a product. There's some transport movements as you would expect. And then there's some talk about the shipment itself. We can start with the piece just to see what it is, right? Because we don't know. So we're going to click on that. And what you now begin to see here is that we're not getting the data from one server. The whole thing started with, on the top, Fraunhofer has a server, which has this data. But if I want to know what's inside here, actually, it refers to Apple. So it's getting data from Apple directly, but you don't see that. It's all part of this response. And so if we were to look in the actual thing, I would see that the product, oh, it's an iPad Pro. Great, fine, it's nice. And then, but we could also look at the transport movement. Let me just close these, right? So what's the transport movement? Let's start with the second one first. The order is not in the order you would expect to see that's how these files work. So the first transport movement we're looking at is a transport from one location to another, as you would expect. And incidentally, now the data comes from Lufthansa. So we're not making separate API calls and then combine the information. It's all embedded in this single file. That's what we refer to as linked data. And that's also directly connected to these semantic models. So in this case, quickly, it's from SFO, which is San Francisco, but for those that know it. It goes to Frankfurt, which is Frankfurt for those that know it. And then transport means, well, I guess it's going to be an airplane. It is indeed, it's a Boeing 777 with these particular registration details. You can go on like this. In fact, I'll go one more further. Just one, because there's an interesting feature about the other transport movement, which is from the airport to a location in Germany called Frankfurt. So it's actually a transport from the airport to a place in Frankfurt. Now, what's interesting is that if you look at the transport means here, it's a truck, as you would expect. What's even more interesting that this truck has an IoT device. It says so here, look, IoT device. And that comes again from a different server. So this approach, all these different pieces of data are all combined into this linked data. And we can really start browsing around the web to find out exactly what is what. So, okay, so I'll go to the IoT device. And what I get actually, and with a map. So this is showing where that truck is at that point in time. And in the end, all of that, if we go right back to the beginning, it all started with a single link to a piece of freight that I happen to have in my hand. And that's the whole point of data sharing. That's the whole point of linked data, is that once you have one piece, you can browse your way around to the entire transport that has been done. This is the demo I wanted to show. I believe I have one more slide.
4 minutes as well.
Perfect. That's it. Lessons learned. First one, we all say it, but we really have to use standards. And why do I say that? Well, we developed the standard while we were doing this, and this was bad news, because you can't really implement things while they're being developed. When the standard moves, you have a real problem. And so it wasn't until our standard became more stable that these dots on the map started exploding from 510 to 20, 50, 100. By the time this project is finished, I'm talking about federated, I'm sure we'll have about 1,000 of these dots on the map, and it will grow from there. But only if these standards are stable. So you must use stable standards. The second one that explains why we can do 100, essentially 100 living labs within this living lab, is that we're not paying for it. These companies, they must see value in this, then they'll invest. So the trick about it is that unless you can demonstrate that data sharing has value, you're not going to have anything. And I think if anything, this confirms that it does. The sort of things you can do with shared data is extremely powerful and very valuable, which is why companies are willing to put the money on the table themselves and invest. You have to plan for changes, obviously, you know that. We're all early adopters. It's part of the thing. Probably one of the biggest things we have done is communication, is explain, 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 and explain again. And we explain to people that know everything, and we explain to people that know nothing. And it's this whole pipeline of education that goes on. And of course, in the process, we learn. And lastly, you have to be quite patient, because it does take a long time to go from 1 dot to 1,000 dots. But that's my story.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We will just quickly move then to the few questions that we also gained the last one.